The Three Martini Lunch is brought to you in part today by Fast Growing Trees, the biggest online nursery in the United States with more than 10,000 different kinds of plants and more than 2 million happy customers right here in the U.S. You too can grow lemon, avocado, olive, or fig trees right inside your home, on top of the wide variety of houseplants they have available. Fast Growing Trees makes it easy to order online, and your plants are shipped directly to your door in just 1 to 2 days. And along with their 30-day Alive and Thrive guarantee, they offer free plant consultation forever. As you know, we love all of our fast-growing trees. In fact, we just got the basil and oregano plants last week. Already had some oregano in our soup last night. Fantastic. Right now, Fast Growing Trees has the best deals online, up to half off on select plants. And listeners to the Three Martini Lunch get an additional 15% off their first purchase when using the code Martini at checkout. That's an additional 15% off at fastgrowingtrees.com and using the code Martini at checkout. Fastgrowingtrees.com, code Martini. Offer is valid for a limited time, and tell them we sent you.
Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Corombos of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Very glad you're with us for the Wednesday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. Jim Garrity, as you know, is on spring break. Here in his place today, once again, Inez Stepman of the Independent Women's Forum. She also writes for The Federalist. She's a Lincoln Fellow at the Claremont Institute, and she is host of the High Noon podcast. And Inez, first of all, great to have you back. And secondly, I know you've been waiting with bated breath for RFK Jr.'s announcement of his running mate. It was a pretty badly kept secret from what I understand. It had leaked out a number of days ago that it's Nicole Shanahan. We'll have more on her bio in just a moment, but here is part of what she had to say in her speech yesterday after RFK Jr. announced her as his running mate.
If you are one of those disillusioned Republicans, I welcome you to join me, a disillusioned Democrat, in this movement to unify and heal America. This independent movement comes at a time of extreme division in America that threatens to tear this country apart. Yes, let's fix it.
Yeah, a lot of charisma there. But one of the things that is interesting here, Inez, is that it's basically a Democrat choosing another Democrat, which should make official Democrats, I think, a little bit worried here, because Nicole Shanahan is not some middle-of-the-road person. Hats off to Free Beacon for pointing this out, but RFK Jr.'s running mate helped to bankroll progressive Los Angeles District Attorney George Gascon's campaign and back some of California's major soft-on-crime policies. This 38-year-old ex-wife of billionaire Google co-founder Sergey Brin gave $25,000 to Gascon's 2020 campaign, joining the list of wealthy progressive backers that includes George Soros and Bay Area millionaires' wives, according to the story, who propelled Gascon into office. That same year, she gave $150,000 to, quote, Reform LA Jails, a project financed by California liberal dark money group Tides and chaired by Black Lives Matter co-founder Patrisse Cullors. In 2020, Reform LA Jails pushed a Los Angeles ballot initiative to defund police and jails in favor of alternatives to incarceration. In 2016, Shanahan spent $85,000 on a successful California voter initiative to allow early release of felons and to make it harder to prosecute juvenile offenders as adults. And criminals, it says, released under the law have gone on to commit violent crimes, including murder, of course. Critics are suggesting that deceptive language might have tricked voters into supporting the measure. So the good news for Republicans here, Inez, is that a lefty, and that's exactly what RFK is, particularly on environmental issues and economic issues, is picking someone who's about as soft on crime as you can get. So I've already seen plenty of people who were supporting people other than Trump in the primary say, I'm done. I can't do this. Whether Democrats need to really pay attention to this, I don't know if this is going to stir the pot much for people normally on the left to consider RFK Jr., but what do you make of it?
First off, I'm glad that that more than California now has to deal with the extremely wealthy ex-wives of Silicon Valley founders and what they choose to do with their money, usually pernicious. But yeah, I mean, look, this is not going to help RFK Jr. with the right, especially on an issue where this is such a sort of pedal to the metal issue for a lot of people. And looking back to the midterms in 2022, there were only 2 places in the country where there actually was a red wave. Of course, we all heard about Florida and Governor DeSantis. The second red wave happened in New York, of all places. Why? Mostly on this crime issue because it's impacting the state so much. It's only grown with the migration crisis and with having a lot of illegal migrants in all of the cities in America now. So I don't think this is a particularly strong pitch. I don't know that I fully agree with the characterization of RFK Jr. as lefty. I really do think he comes like with a grab bag of different issues, especially now, strangely, especially growing up in California. Again, it was once a very lefty coded thing to be concerned about health and environmentalism. I think that is changing. I think there are a lot of people, I don't know if it's because of the COVID vaccine or because of, other concerns about the quality of our food or whatever, but I feel like that's much more a horseshoe issue now, where you get a lot of people on the right concerned about those issues. And that's RFK's bread and butter, obviously, and has been for a long time, in a very extreme way, I might add. I mean, he's not just against the COVID vaccine, he's against the measles vaccines,
right,
at least for requirements in schools and so on. So, but I think a lot of those issues now code very horseshoe. This just confirms, though, that even before this pick, it looked like RFK Jr. was pulling more from the left than from the right. The last few polls that we've gotten with RFK Jr. in the mix show that Trump has about a 2-point lead over Biden nationally. And then with RFK Jr. in the mix, it's something like a 4 or 5-point lead, meaning he's doing more damage to Biden than he is. And I think that's why you're going to start hearing Democrats come out and attack RFK Jr. And actually probably why it's smart for him to pick somebody on the left, because it seems like the majority of his voters are coming from the left and not from the right, even though he has some support on the right.
Yeah, the first people they'll probably send out are his cousins. They're always out there blasting him after that Super Bowl ad and other things. They're more worried about what happens to the Democratic Party than just, maybe sending RFK Jr. a text. Hey, we don't think you're doing the right thing here on vaccines or whatever. But they're very, very public in how much they don't support him, which is kind of awkward. I don't know if they still get together for Thanksgiving, but it's got to be a little frosty in those situations.
His ads have been, honestly, great. The one at the Super Bowl was great. It's just like a complete throwback to the 60s, the Kennedy name. And then he had a much more serious, a very long ad that he put out about a week ago, I think, that has been going viral, where he just shows the contrast between America looking forward in the mid 1960s and being confident in itself and putting a man on the moon, and then looking at the state of America today. I thought it was an extremely effective ad, and I do think he has some messages that are really going to resonate, not just with the left, not just with the right, but with Americans across the board who are frustrated with politics. So I wouldn't completely count this out. I mean, I wouldn't be shocked to discover that the polling that shows that he's consistently getting 15%, which would be huge for a third-party candidate, turn out to be true.
Yeah, close to Perot numbers there. In terms of his appeal across the parties and potentially to Republicans, there are two definitely that he's tapped into. One is the government muscling in and making so many demands, particularly during the COVID pandemic. And I think people definitely saw that as government overreach. And then also his defense of free speech, which is something that the left isn't all that interested anymore now that they have the powers and the leverage in so many different areas. He has been pretty extreme in the past on environmentalism, but he hasn't talked about that as much lately. And I'm just curious to see how he's going to prioritize his issues going forward, and whether he's going to really try to angle after the left or the right, or he's going to try to actually grab from both sides with equal effort here. It's going to be interesting to see the strategy.
Yeah, I know. I think it is interesting. I think how well or poorly he does will show something about the dissatisfaction with the current trajectory of the two parties. And I mean, the fact that we have to throw back to the Kennedy name itself is kind of funny as a third option, right? But again, I thought he was really effective using that name first in the throwback ad that really is just like the Kennedy, which only political nerds will remember, or people who were there and watching it the first time around. But it is catchy and seems much more upbeat than your typical political commercial. It's just it had a fun nostalgia to it, and then explicitly playing on that feeling that I think is pervasive and not limited to any particular political party about American decline, and that we are in, at minimum, a kind of 70s malaise, and at maximum something much worse. And I think that is something that Americans feel, even though we don't articulate it every day, even with watching the Boeing CEO resign or whatever, even though we don't know the specifics behind that. We just feel generally, and with good reason, that things don't work the way they used to in America, and that there's this pervasive sense of malaise, which I think he is playing to that in an effective way.
Well, the Democrats might not be too excited about RFK Jr. picking another lefty as his running mate, but I'm excited about Factor meals. Eating better is easy with Factor's delicious, ready-to-eat meals because every fresh, never frozen meal is chef-crafted, dietitian approved, and ready to go in just 2 minutes. Go to factormeals.com/3ml50. That's 3ml50, and use the code 3ml50 to get 50% off. We just got a big box of Factor meals yesterday, and I'm already salivating at trying one for lunch today in just a few minutes. We've got pasta, we've got chicken, we've got pork chops, and with vegetables and sides, perfectly balanced, and I really look forward to seeing just how delicious these are. Sign up online at factormeals.com/3ml50 and use the code 3ml50 to get 50% off. What are you waiting for? Get started today and then get after your goals. Save 50% with the code 3ml50 at factormeals.com/3ml50. That's factormeals.com/3ml50. All right, and as on to our bad martini now, and for that we head over to Politico, but hat tip to Hot Air for actually flagging this because Politico thought this was such an important point that they put it in the 16th paragraph of this story about why Biden hasn't done anything in terms of executive action on the border after suggesting that he would after most Republicans balked at the Senate version of immigration reform. Much of it is talking about orders that would expand detention facilities near the border and maybe some changes to what is required to get asylum. And so here's where Politico takes this story. Any specific policy would be tricky to execute, not just because it could face legal challenges, but also because it will likely face steep backlash from progressives and the immigration advocacy community. Reports that the Biden administration was considering using the same statute the Trump administration employed to aggressively shape the immigration system quickly sparked weeks of pushback and even internal resistance. So their goal is to balance that out, Inez, by doing this. Like the Obama administration did in 2012 with the launch of the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, Biden administration officials are also examining whether there's an action they could take for a different group of undocumented people who have long resided in the United States, according to the 3 people familiar with the administration's planning. One idea that has been floated among administration officials is opening access to the cancellation of removal program for people who have lived in the U.S. for over 10 years and have citizen or resident relatives who would, quote unquote, suffer if they were deported. If specific requirements are met and an immigration judge approves cancellation of removal, a migrant is able to obtain a green card. And so basically there's going to be amnesty if this idea were to be pursued for people who have been here for over 10 years. So Biden might mollify a little bit of his base with that. But the big middle, which he kind of needs if he wants to get reelected here, I have to think, given that immigration and concern about the border is already the number one issue right now in this campaign, would absolutely explode on him. So what do you make of the fact that they're so tone deaf, they're actually considering this?
Yeah, I mean, this is obviously DACA Part 2, and I think it'll land quite differently than DACA Part 1. I mean, obviously there were massive constitutional concerns with doing this unilaterally through the executive. But as I recall, and I was very much against it at the time, DACA was a fairly popular policy. I think the mood of the country on immigration has darkened considerably since then. I mean, I was already against it, and I'm not giving my own views, but just the feeling of the country, and the polls bear this out, that people are much more concerned about this issue because it has gotten so much worse. We already had border problems. We already had open border problems under Obama, but in the intervening years, the problem has gotten much, much worse. Trump did the best he could with executive tools to kind of tamp that down. And with the Biden administration coming in, we've seen on multiple fronts that not only, are they reversing what the Trump administration did and the statutes and the various sort of administrative tools that they've used to tamp down on the border have all been abandoned. I mean, you have like affirmative things that the administration is doing, right? They're fighting with Texas in the courts right now to cut the wire that the state of Texas is trying to put up on the border, right? They lost that battle, by the way. But in any case, we'll see how the merits of that. I think that case has enormous potential to reshape the immigration status quo in America. I think it has the potential to carve out a role for the states in policing their own borders in a way that, like, I'm not saying that's the way it is going to go, but it has the potential to do that in a way that I think will change the shape of this issue more than anything in the last 30 years. So that's why I highlight that case. But the Biden administration has shown us over and over again, whether in that battle with Texas or more recently this week, the news came out that in 200,000 asylum cases, and most of these asylum cases are people without real claims to asylum, right? So these are cases essentially where these people are going to be deported at the end of the hearing 90+% of the time because they don't actually have a credible asylum claim. So the Biden administration is just not filing paperwork. It has not filed paperwork in more than 200,000 of those cases, which functionally means those people get to stay and remain in limbo in the United States indefinitely as long as those cases are not complete, right? So just even the minimum of doing the work that the administration is supposed to do to deport people who are illegally in the United States, even under our very lax asylum laws, the administration is just not bothering to show up to do it. So I don't know that it could be any clearer. But with this cherry on top of amnesty in a climate where people are very concerned about the impact of immigration and especially illegal immigration and migration with an open border, this is, completely politically tone deaf, but like many of the things the Biden administration does, Biden is the sort of moderate sounding face of something. And then the administration under it is staffed by woke millennials who are implementing the most radical agenda we've ever seen in the country.
Oh, yeah. They're staffed by total open border advocates there. And whether it's incompetence, dereliction, or a deliberate plan for this invasion to happen and it's leaning more and more towards the sinister, in my opinion, given how much power they do have to curtail the flow, but refuse to do it. And the other thing that this story points out is that because the numbers, they kind of peaked over 300,000 illegal crossings in December, and they've gone down now. And ever since the last few weeks, there's been less press attention on the border. So Biden feels like he's got more time to sort this out. So there's not any actual real urgency in his mind to deal with this. It's only when he's taking a little bit of heat from the media, which has the shortest attention span possible, when a Democrat's the one in the crosshairs, is putting the pressure on him. And when it's not, the urgency is much, much less.
Yeah, I do think the pressure that we'll keep up is from the blue state governors and mayors who are paying in large part for this crisis now. And I think it is the most successful political gambit of the last 30 years that DeSantis and Abbott were sending illegal immigrants to New York, to Martha's Vineyard, to Washington, D.C., right, to L.A. I think that has been enormously successful. And now it's happening independently, right? Because these sanctuary cities have New York City has such incredibly generous policies towards, the latest was that apparently the illegal migrants here are going to get a debit card, just stacked with, can I get one of those? But they have such incredibly generous policies that people out the border are saying Roosevelt Hotel, Manhattan, right? Because the word has spread that these cities are incredibly generous. So that pressure behind the scenes, I think, is still very much there. And sometimes you can see it spill out into the open. You have like a Mayor Adams making comments about, the way that New York City is unable to deal with what Hidalgo, Texas has been dealing with for 30 years.
Well, if the Biden administration does pull the trigger on this amnesty, it's not going to be pretty, and America needs to be ready for what comes next. And one of the things you can always do is be ready through 4 Patriots. Find their best deals at 4patriots.com/martini, including the news that the deluxe 3-month survival food kits are back in stock. They were sold out for more than a year. You'll get delicious recipes like pancakes, mac and cheese, Aztec chili, potato soup, spaghetti, and lasagna. And these packages are designed to last 25 years when stored properly, 100% satisfaction guaranteed. Don't forget, you still have great deals available to you with the Sauna Wrap Therapeutic Blanket, the Solar Go Fridge with the solar panel, and the Patriot Pure items, including the Sanitation Solution Machine and the Disinfecting Power Bank. You can stash food away and be confident that when a disaster strikes, you and your family will be ready. Go to 4patriots.com/martini to get the deluxe 3-month survival food kit and the peace of mind that you deserve. Plus, get free shipping on orders over $97. That's the number 4patriots.com/martini. That's 4patriots.com/martini. All right, Inez, on to our crazy martini now. And for that, we go out to the left coast, your old stomping grounds, and a story from The Atlantic about just how insane the level of anti-Semitism is on the campus of Stanford University. Theo Baker is a student journalist at Stanford, and he wrote this story for The Atlantic. A couple of quick anecdotes from the story, and then I'll get your larger and specific thoughts on it. He says, one of the section leaders for my computer science class, so I assume that's a TA, his name's Hamza El-Budali, believes that President Joe Biden should be killed for supporting Israel. Quote, I'm not calling for a civilian to do it, but I think a military should. I'd be happy if Biden was dead. I'm not calling for a vigilante to do it, he later clarified, but I am saying he's guilty of mass murder and should be treated in the same way that a terrorist with darker skin would be. Then there was a mandatory freshman seminar in October 10th, so 3 days after the attacks. A lecturer named Amir Loggins tossed out his lesson plan to tell students that the actions of the Palestinian, quote, military force had been justified, that the Israelis were colonizers, and that the Holocaust had been overemphasized, according to interviews that Mr. Baker conducted with students in the class. Loggins then asked the Jewish students to identify themselves. He instructed one of them to stand up, face the window, and then he kind of kicked away his chair. Loggins described this as an effort to demonstrate Israel's treatment of Palestinians. A spokesman for Stanford says there were different recollections of the details on what exactly happened in that situation. And then the Jewish students on campus tried to bring down the level of anti-Semitism on campus by having panel discussions and other efforts to have a dialogue there. But of course, you got the crazies barging into the auditorium, drowning out the panelists. They covered their faces with keffiyehs or medical masks and shouted things like, go back to Brooklyn. One protester who emerged as the leader of the group said that she and her compatriots would, quote, take all of your places and ensure Israel falls, told attendees to get off the campus, and launched into conspiracy theories about Jews involved in child trafficking. And Inez, you were with us earlier when we looked at poll numbers about how young people feel about the terrorist attacks and Hamas and Israel, and you said it should be no surprise that young people are at this point now, given the state of the educational system. It's still shocking for a lot of people to see this so brazenly on campus, including from people sanctioned by the university to speak and as a TA, as professors, as guest lecturers, what have you. I should point out that your Twitter bio self-describes you as a Palo Alto disrespecter. So what's your take on this, and what insights can you provide as someone who grew up in that area?
Yeah, this is a little unrelated to Stanford, although certainly it's the center of Palo Alto life still is the Stanford campus. Just as an aside, one of my classmates, Malcolm Harris, who is on the far left, writes for Jacobin, he wrote a book about Palo Alto, and it's sort of a Marxist analysis of the history of California and Palo Alto. But at the end, he has one suggestion, which is related to all of this, that I think has some merit, which is we can return the campus of Stanford to the Ohlone Indians, land back from Stanford. That's one thing that I actually will support. But those things are very related, right? The view that America is evil is very much related to the view that Israel is evil. And it's funny because these two countries are perhaps the two countries with the least, or at least the most complicated relationship with so-called colonialism, right? If we think about colonialism as one people conquering another on a piece of land, literally the history of every people and every nation in the world is that, right? Each tribe in the United States did conquer another tribe there before. There is this chain of conquest that is part of the history of humanity. But of course, the United States started out as a colony and had a very, sort of ambivalent relationship with its own brief flirtation with colonization. And Teddy Roosevelt was sort of gung-ho about it. But there was a lot of American resistance to the idea of America as a colonial power. And then Israel, of course, is a modern country. Most of that land was initially purchased and then either negotiated through treaties with larger empire powers, or fought and won through wars. So both of these, it seems like a very, very bad fit, but it is a perfect fit when you think about the fact that the underlying ideology here is simply anti-Western. It is very much akin to the domestic sphere, where we see the division between the oppressed and the oppressor being the moral division of everything. There's nothing that an oppressed person, quote unquote, can do either to improve his own fate, right, or have agency, or consequently, when that person behaves badly, for example, commits crimes, right, there's always an excuse for those crimes. On the flip side, the oppressor always carries moral guilt with all action, right, and you see that on the national level. And the same people who are talking about, Israel as a horrible colonialist power believe that the United States is on stolen land as well, and believe that this is a evil colonialist power that is built on genocide, right? So all of this hangs together is my point. I don't know why people are so surprised about it, but I am glad that they are surprised about it, frankly, because I think there's the potential in some of this to have a wake-up call moment for a lot of people who are not interested in politics. They're not, listening day in, day out, and they're certainly not following what's happening on the campuses. They have a vague notion that, of course, the campuses are left-wing and there's some crazy activists, right? But I think a lot of people were really surprised to see this in the wake of October 7th, immediately to see, glory to our martyrs projected on the campus of GW, right? And I'm hoping that we have a moment like we did with K-12 in 2020 and 2021, where a lot of people realize how radical these institutions have gotten. Because in the case of higher ed, there's a lot that we can do in terms of policy. Nearly every university is completely dependent on federal money and federal loans. There are a lot of strings we can attach to that. We can control their behavior very effectively if they want to be dependent on the taxpayer. They are responsible for this student loan crisis. While they've gotten very, very rich off of it, I think that we should be taxing their endowments to pay off some of those student loans instead of looking to the taxpayers to do it. There's a lot that we can do in terms of higher ed policy. It just requires the will, and it requires, it requires our politicians to follow what is increasingly the polling, not just of Republicans, but of independents, and recognizing, these universities are radical institutions. They are not like they were, even 30 years ago, where they're already far left. They're not like they were 50 or 70 years ago. And we ought to treat them like what they are, which is essentially, little woke madrasas that graduate ranks of their graduates into every other institution. In some sense, the entire sort of problem that Americans now have, and especially the right has, with the power of corporate America on cultural issues and so on, a lot of that just has to do with graduating cultural revolutionaries into every institution. Like, what did you think was going to happen?
No, that's an excellent point. And my last question here could probably take an hour, but let's try to condense it to just a minute or two. While some university presidents are activists themselves, most of them are just refusing to stand up to the crazy people. So why, compared to so many other areas of life, are the university executives, the university presidents, constantly the biggest cowards in these situations?
There's a lot that goes into that, I think, and I'm not going to give you a long answer. But I do think that there is an overlap between old liberalism and new, right? And in many cases, the young activists are simply being more radical and more consistent about the principles of their old teachers. And their old teachers are kind of shocked because they have some lip service that they've paid to principles like freedom of speech or whatever. And they're shocked by their progeny, essentially. But I do think there's a connection there. And I think there's a reason that they always end up siding with the left. It's because the worst thing for a lot of these professors would be, and presidents of universities would be, to be associated in any way with those icky right-wingers and knuckle-dragging, conservatives. So who have been right about all of the predictions for the last 20 years about where this is going, right? So I think there's still an enormous reluctance to do that. Plus, they're just, they're bureaucrats, as you can't really expect kind of a lot of backbone or individual courage from that type of person.
If you agree with them, they'll just back off, I guess, is the mindset, but then they'll just be back for more. We see that all the time. Inez, always great to have you with us. Thanks so much for all your time and filling in for Jim over the past few weeks. We truly appreciate it, and we'll talk to you down the road.
It's been great. Thank you so much for having me.
Inez Stepman of the Independent Women's Forum. She is also a writer for The Federalist, and she's a Lincoln Fellow at the Claremont Institute and host of the High Noon podcast. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today, and please subscribe to the podcast if you don't already. Also, thank you for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us all on X Inez is at Inez Felcher. Jim is at Jim Garrity. I'm at Dateline_DC. Have a terrific Wednesday and join us again on Thursday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.